Hello again, I'm Tripp Rogers, and this is Tripp's Take. Well, this week we've been dealing with Tropical Storm Debbie. Yes, came a call, and in fact, the storm passed over where we live in Savannah, Georgia. And I think the hard part about it was the fact that we just had this torrential rain for almost 24 hours. And we knew it was going to flood, and we knew it was going to be difficult. But the rain was just so much. And of course, since we have a pool in the backyard, I was concerned about it overflowing. Well, it never did, to my knowledge. I guess it may have, but it may have run off the back and didn't come into our house, and I'm thankful for that. And, you know, the other part of it is you worry about trees, and down the street there was a tree that came down, and it fell on a neighbor's property. It fell on a street, but luckily there were no power lines. It didn't take any lines down. And that's the fear, because when a tree goes down, it can take power lines. And that's something that you'll always fear. And of course you fear a tree falling on your property. I mean, let's be realistic. And I always tell the story, after there was Superstorm Sandy in 2012, the year before we had a hurricane that came through the area. And the hurricane itself, while, you know, there was a lot of rain, a lot of wind, but it was the aftermath that really did us in because of the winds. It was taking power lines down and trees down all over the state. In fact, my across the street neighbor had a tree fall, and then 20 minutes later, my next door neighbor had a tree fall, and it fell partially on my driveway. Now, I had moved my car. If I hadn't moved my car, the car would have had a tree fall on top of it. So I count myself very lucky. And of course, Superstorm Sandy is something that anyone who lived at the Jersey Shore will never, ever forget. Actually, the tri-state area, because it was just such a storm. And so as my daughter reminds me every time there is a hurricane, that I say, well, we got to deal with the tropical storm or hurricane here in Savannah. You lived through Superstorm Sandy, Daddy. You can get through this. Although I remember that week because it was probably the longest week I've ever had as a broadcaster, and I've told stories about it here on Tripp's Take. So it was just one of those things. But hopefully we are now through the worst of it. Although we only saw the sun for about 5 minutes on Wednesday. It'd be nice to see the sun for a day and we get some drying out. That's what we would hope would happen. Other thing I want to talk about real quick is the Olympics. And I've been watching the Olympic coverage on NBC, and I got to say, I've really enjoyed it. Been watching the basketball, though, the last couple of days as both the men's and women's team make their way towards hopefully winning gold medals. The women's team has now won 59 straight games. They're in the semifinals. The men are in the semifinals, too, with the professionals. And it's been enjoyable watching the basketball, but NBC's Olympic coverage has been so good. And listen, I'm not a huge Snoop Dogg fan. Never have been, never will be. But I got to say, guy's everywhere. And it's really fun to watch. And NBC is using him in the right way. And he adds color and flavor to the Olympics. He really does. And I applaud NBC for that one. I think NBC also has struck gold with the concept of let's not save the events for prime time. Let's show everything live, because people are responding. A lot of people are watching them, and like myself, this week my schedule changed. I was working mornings, so I could watch live events in the afternoons from Paris because there's a 6-hour time difference. Of course, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the games come to the United States in Los Angeles in 2028. And that is Tripp's Take for August the 8th, 2024. Love to hear your comments and questions. Please feel free to email me, trippstake@gmail.com. Fantasy football players, the Hall of Famer Mike Scheck and I are gearing up another year of the Fantasy Sultans. Our first podcast for the season is going to drop next week. You can join us on Spotify for podcasters and YouTube. Same spot you can find Tripp's Take. Just search for the Fantasy Sultans. If you like the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you can listen to WTRSradio.com online. Join me again next week for another edition of Tripp's Take. For now, I'm Tripp Rogers. Thanks for listening, watching, and joining me. Make it a great one.